Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. And a question I received by email is, what is the difference between opacity versus fill in layers, and how could I use that as a photographer? So let's take a look at this. Are we ready? Let's do it. Hey everybody, let's take a look at what is the difference between opacity and fill in layers and how we can actually use that as photographers, because traditionally it's an item or technique that is used by illustrators and designers. And of course, I'm not an illustrator or designer. I'm a photographer and photo artist. So how could I use this? Well, I like to use it for watermarks when I have to have something proofed and send it to a client to sign off on it. And then they'll get the high-res print from me. Or if I'm doing work for another photographer, which I've done in the past, where they're sending me stuff that, hey, Steve, could you fix this or do this? Because I don't have this skill level in Photoshop and I just don't have time to figure it out. So I'm just wholesaling my services back to them. And I send them a low-res image with a watermark on it to protect that. And if everything is fine and that's what they need, then they get the high-res image sent to them, provided I get payment, right? So let's take a look at how we do this and understand what is the difference between in layers in Photoshop. What's the difference between that opacity and fill? So here I am in Photoshop, and I'm using this image for an example. And just disclaimer, this is just a stock image. And you can see before and after. I'll turn off the top layer quickly. You'll see her tummy's tucked in a little bit there. I typically don't do that unless it's requested by the client. So here's what I like to do. First of all, I have to have an understanding of opacity versus layer, but I'm going to create a watermark that I want to apply on this image. And using fill is a big deal in creating a watermark for photographers. Because again, as I mentioned, it typically the fills and opacity are used a lot by illustrators and designers, and I am not. But in photography, we tend to use watermarks quite a bit. So let me show you how to build something like that using opacity versus fill. I'm going to grab the type tool, which is way over here. Just T for type on your keyboard, or just select it on your toolbar. And the font that you're going to choose, I just have my last font I use, but you pick out whatever font size that you want to use. I'm just going to click on the image. And you see it just puts a default text right there. I'm just going to double click on that to highlight that. And I'm going to type in the word proof. And then enter the keyboard, or just click on the, click on the layer. And I'm going to do Control T, Command T on a Mac to resize this. So we can see that a little bit better. And then enter the keyboard. Now let's take a look at up here where it says opacity and fill and try to understand the difference between the two. So if I go over here to opacity, now this is just called scrubbing. You could use the slider if you want to change the opacity there, or you could just click and drag to the left and I'm just scrubbing down the opacity. And notice that it goes to nothing, right? At 0, and I push it back to 100%, and we see the entire layer. So that's what opacity does. Well, what does fill do? Well, if I click and drag to pull that down, it looks like it's doing exactly the same between, as opacity versus fill. What's the difference? I mean, they're both doing the same thing. So how do I make this work different? And here's what we have to do. I'm going to come down here to an adjustment layer called Effects, and I'm going to choose, which is commonly used a lot for the technique I'm going to share with you, called Bevel and Emboss. And when I choose that, this dialog box opens up, and you can play with these sliders to get the look that you want to get, and the size, and again, just whatever you want to have. Maybe add some contour. Nah, I'm not doing contour. How about texture? And I'll play with texture a little bit. And again, maybe the depth of this. And again, this is all personal preference. And we'll probably pull that down a little bit right there. Okay, so now when I click on OK, now watch the difference. If I go back to opacity and pull this down, this fades away till I go to 0, push it back to 100%. But now if I go to fill, watch what happens now. It's the fill within the text that goes away, but the effects stays there. And like I'm looking right through. It's almost like, again, a watermark. And I might do this, Control T, and I'm going to go to the outer corner here or here, doesn't really matter, on this side. And I'm going to click and drag and maybe resize this if I want, but that looks pretty good right there, and turn the keyboard. Now, before I would send this off, I would do this, and that is I should do a session on libraries in the future, but you should have your channels, paths, and libraries panel available to you. And I have these different groupings, and under groups I have a category called objects, and I have a couple objects in there. I want to put this into libraries so I can reuse this over and over and over again on future projects. So that's all I have to do is grab my move tool. So V like in Victor to grab the move tool, or on your toolbar, you would go right there to grab it. I'm just going to click on the text layer, click and drag it in to the object category in libraries. Let go, and it will load that into libraries, and that will be permanently available to me on future projects until I decide to delete that out of the library category there. So an example, I'm going to delete the very top layer, and let's say I'm working on a project, and now I would like to apply that watermark. I just go over to libraries, find it, click and drag, move it in, readjust the size and location. Let me just bump up the size a little bit, just for demo purposes, and enter on the keyboard. And there you go. Now, to send this off to a client, I'm not going to send a high-res image. I want to send a very low-res image with that watermark on it. So just a little tip. If you go to File drop-down menu and choose Export, Save for Web. Now, what Photoshop will do automatically when you choose Save for Web, it knows to save it as 72 as a resolution automatically. I know this image is 300 as a resolution. It will automatically make it 72. I make sure it's a JPEG image right here. In the little drop-down menu, you'll see different features to choose from, or types of files. I'm going to choose JPEG right there. The quality is really low. I have it set to 10. So you can move a slider back and forth, but mine's set to 10. And it's set to low over here. If I go to very high, you'll see that it changes the quality to 80, and I don't want that. I want it to go to low, so it just automatically makes the quality a 10 for me. I come down here, I see the size is 4,200 pixels. Well, that's too big. I'm going to make that about 1,000 pixels across, and automatically adjust the height for me. And if I click on the side here to accept this, you'll see that it'll re-render out, and it'll show me that that's going to be about 32K. So it's a very small file that can be sent by email to a client or, say, another photographer. I'm just going to choose Save. I will put that in, we'll call it Proof. And we'll save that. And then let's take a look at this now. I'm just going to go to the sample folder, find that proof image, and there's the proof image. And you can see that if I click and drag, or zoom in, I should say, not click and drag, but to zoom in, it pixelates and distorts. And if I take a look at the size, so image, size, you're going to see that that is a 72 resolution file. And that's what I would send to the client. Save that JPEG, shove it out to them. Once they sign off on that, and I get my payment, because I don't like accounts receivable, and then I will send them the high-res image. Or again, if it's a client, it's usually a large print, and so they sign off that. And that way it protects me from not having them say, hey, that's not really what I wanted, and now I got to reprint it at my cost. No, I protect myself. They have to actually sign off on a contract that this is what they want. They know that in advance. I get my payment, and then they get to print. So with that out of the way, hopefully you learned something here today. And again, if you could do me a favor, especially if you're fairly new to the channel, and there's, please like this video, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell so the next time I upload a new video to YouTube, you will get notified. Okay, so with that out of the way, get that camera out, practice shooting, and keep thinking out of the box. Until next time, see ya.